Letter to a 17-year-old son. Although the following letter was written during the war, it throws light on problems which are equally urgent in the post-war period. Dear Greg, in one sense I have been planning to write this letter for several years in order to pull together for what they may be worth some notions of your choice of an occupation and how to train yourself for it. In another sense, the letter is occasioned by a recent news story about Pearl Stein, the Brooklyn College basketballer, who carried a couple of books but never went to class. In another sense, the reason for the letter is the too brief talk we had the other day when you showed me a pamphlet about Army plan for training 17-year-olds in colleges as members of the enlist reserve. In another sense, this is an answer to ideas you have put forward from time to time about enlisting next month. So you see, you're in for a large dose of the old man's idea of life, education, war, and whatnot, especially whatnot. In a novel by Duer Lilton, whose books you would not like, which is just as well, a character says, "What a terrible and unfair advantage merely living longer gives a man." It is both a wise and sad remark, one that can serve as a warning to members of different generations when dealing with each other. The older always know that they know more. The young always know that the old don't know enough to keep from messing up the world. Both, of course, are quite right. Progress would occur if each generation could pass on what is learned to the next, and if the next picked up from there and went on. This hardly ever happens. In our day we try to hand over to specialists in schools the responsibility for telling the next generation what preceding generations have learned. On the whole, this probably works better than if we tried it ourselves, but it doesn't work very well. There's a machine-like quality about it which lacks the individual touch. What follows in this letter is just an attempt to apply the advantage I have, because I have lived longer, to you, because I know you better than a teacher does, or a college catalog, or a newspaper, or a recruiting poster. I have not only lived longer, but have had the unusual advantage for seeing what's going on in the world. The average man gets a chance to look at the world only when his work is over. My full-time job for about almost 20 years has been trying to figure it out. I get paid for the privilege of talking to almost anybody on earth, asking questions about the things they're supposed to know, and have given plenty of time to figuring out the answers. What's more, I have carried to extremes the habit of reading books, where more answers are to be found than in the heads of one's contemporaries. I'm sure I know many answers, and anyhow I can't expect you to accept the ones I think I know. But now that you are up against decisions that involve very general questions of what kind of a world it is and how to act in it, I would be wrong and lazy of me, I think, if I didn't try to pass on my ideas. Your problem of Navy enlisting next month, or entering the Army enlisted reserve, is all bound up, it seems to me, with what you're going to do later, and that's why I'm trying to handle them all together. We might start with the more specific problems and work toward the more general ones. There are three kinds of soldiers: professionals, citizens, and bums. All this applies to Navy people as well. Professional soldiering isn't a bad life if you have the kind of temperament. It requires a high sense of honor and duty, a low degree of curiosity, ambition, and independence. The pay is poor, but security is practically perfect. A professional soldier can learn almost anything. Almost none of them learn any more than they have to. General Burkenman of West Point is perhaps the only one of the hundreds of professionals I have met in the past 3 years who really struck me as outstanding, all-rounded man. I have the impression General Marshall is another, but I doubt if the same could be said of many other top officers. Soldiering is a respectable but deadening sort of profession. I know lots of young men to whom I would recommend it. You are not one of them, although I can think of a lot of people who would be more unhappy as professional soldiers than you would be. If you want to be one, the thing to do is go to West Point or Annapolis or VMI and learn the profession from the ground up and do it right. There are some who come up from the ranks, but most of them never quite get over the strain that such a rise creates. It just isn't the best way to do it. The citizen soldier is a very different animal. He goes into the army because his country decides that it needs a few years of his life. Sometimes it takes his life, but it tries not to. People get killed in other occupations too. The element of war risk will be left out of this decision, and the army will be treated just like a coal mining or driving a racing automobile, both of which are highly dangerous. The citizen soldier goes into an army on the terms laid down by his country. If he has good sense and moral patriotism, he goes willingly and tries like hell to make the best of it. But the young man's duty to go into the army is like the citizen's duty to pay taxes. It is not exalt or poetic or heroic. In a democracy, the decision to go in or stay out as a citizen soldier, not as a professional, ought to be left to the individual. Leaving it to him is bad for him and bad for the country. I don't pay taxes on the basis of what I like to pay, and I don't pay my 1947 taxes in 1945. We have learned since the last war that recruiting is a bad business. We have adopted a sane, responsible attitude toward how to get the huge armies we seem to need. 95% of men now in uniform would say today that they would not enlist. The other 5%, except the professionals, are by no means the best soldiers. They're mostly the ones that I classify above as bums. That may be harsh terms. What I mean is young men who have an especially hard time to adjust to life, who gets in trouble with the police, who haven't any purpose or sense of responsibility, and who, by and large, are having a rotten time. In peace, police magistrates give a lot of these guys a choice between house of correction and the services. Many of them pick the services. Sometimes, but not usually, they get straightened out. In wartime, this group tends to expand greatly. Perfectly decent kids can't see beyond the war, can't sit down and think their way through to a purpose. The pressure and